Good afternoon, everyone, if you're here. I can't tell who's on Zoom and who's on YouTube, but good afternoon. We're doing For Seekers of God, the reminiscences and spiritual talks by Swami Vivekananda. And last week we stopped kind of in the middle of one. We were reading about what Swamiji had wanted to do, and I'm going to start on page 182, the second paragraph down, where he is telling about when Swamiji wrote a letter in French. He had learned French, and they had to run to the, no one knew exactly what it said, so they had to go to the Hyderabad State College and get someone to translate it. Only then did we come to know Swamiji's whereabouts and that he had learnt French. Well, I told you at the start that Swamiji had planned to spend his life in meditation, japa, and other spiritual practices. But the great power that descended as Ramakrishna did not allow him to do so. It yoked him to the work of propagating the message of the age that would save the world. The master yogin that Swamiji was, he could easily have spent his days in samadhi, total absorption in God, if he had only wanted to do so. But the master drew him into the midst of intense activities. He has engaged all of us. He has engaged all of you as well to give shape to his message. Blessed are the men who come, whom he has chosen. Now the monk is going to ask another question. But surely are not austerities and spiritual struggles also necessary? You too have undergone a lot of them. Mahapurushji, yes, spiritual exercises are very necessary, and so also are austerities. The only means of keeping the course of one's life directed towards God is spiritual effort. But why should one think that this spiritual struggle and austerity can have only one form? Look here, for instance. What suffering you undergo and what a fight you have to wage against adverse circumstances to carry on God's work. This too is a kind of austerity and spiritual struggle. The one idea that you always have to keep burning in your heart is that whatever you do is for his sake, for his service, nothing for yourselves. This too is a kind of spiritual practice. Out of his grace, he has chosen you as his instruments, and that has made your life blessed. Know it for certain that for establishing the religion of the age, Yuga Dharma, he does not depend on any particular person. The fortunate ones alone are able to work for him. I have seen quite a number. There are others again who to all outward appearance are good for nothing, and yet the master makes them work one person. That is why Swamiji would say that if it pleases him, he could create 1,000 Vivekanandas. Have this idea ever bright in your mind that by doing his work, we ourselves are blessed. Be assured, when you engage yourself in this work, you will, as a matter of course, get devotion, faith, and other things. There can be no doubt about that. As compared with the spiritual struggles of those who roam about in hills and forests and live on alms, your struggles are in no way inferior. For one's own salvation and for the good of the world, that is the message of this age. A monk. In the midst of work, one is often assailed by pride and egotism. Mahapurushji, so long as you have this idea clear in your mind that you are doing God's work, you cannot have pride or anything like that. If you have the correct attitude, you need have no fear. Along with work, you should practice meditation and japa regularly. That helps in maintaining a balance. And a little intrusion by pride and egotism is not a thing to be worried about, for God himself will put you under the circumstances necessary for the wiping out of that little defect. As for pride and egotism, these can come even to the man engaged in austerities and solitude, who may think that he has become a great ascetic. What matters, you know, is sincerity of purpose. If one is false to oneself, can one have neither true spiritual practice nor true service? If you are true to yourself, if your thoughts and actions are in accord with each other, pride and egotism can never assail you, whether you are engaged in spiritual practice or service to God. You must be ever watchful about the goal. You must never forget the aim of life. Reminds us of Shakespeare's, "To thine own self be true, and thou canst be false to anyone." Okay, number 70 on page 184. It's in Odakamund in 1926. Uti. Mahapurushji reached the Nilgiri Hills from Madras on the 4th of June and stayed there at Sri Hatiramji Mat, the summer residence of the head of the temple of Balaji at Tirupati. The climate of Uti is very salubrious and the scenery is charming. The altitude of the place is about 8,000 feet above sea level. In those days, it was also the summer residence of the governor of Madras. Mahapurushji had visited it once before in 1924, when he had stayed for some months at Kunur, about 10 miles from Uttakamund. At that time, he had laid the foundation stone of the Ramakrishna ashram at Uti. After coming here, Mahapurushji spent his time mostly by himself. He did not much like to mix with people. All the same, the local devotees came to him every afternoon, heard him talk on spiritual matters, and returned home with his blessings and their hearts full of joy. His spiritual disposition began to attract more and more devotees. Apart from such spiritual ministration, he remained absorbed in his own self, and that's self with a capital S, merged in the infinite Brahman, the existence, knowledge, bliss, absolute. His mind seemed to be getting gradually more and more withdrawn from the things of the world, and he became more reserved and indrawn. The only expression of life on the ordinary human plane that one could notice in him in those days was when he talked and kept company with the simple hill boys and girls. When he went out for his walk in the morning and evening, he used to have his pockets full of sweets and coins, which he distributed on the way among these innocent children, and he mixed with them wholeheartedly, as though he was one of themselves. When he sat alone in his room in Sri Hatiramji Mat, he closed his eyes, or he looked at something far away with vacant eyes, as if his mind traveled in some supersensuous plane. One felt awed when approaching him at such moments. Often he would say that he would free himself from all responsibilities of the head of the Ramakrishna Mountain Mission and spend the rest of his days in the deep solitude of the Nilgiri Hills. His mind remained completely detached from everything, above all mundane entanglements. One day he was sitting quietly in his room after his morning walk, with his face towards the wide glazed window. His eyes seemed to be fixed on the blue hills spread before him like huge waves. One of his attendants, who happened to enter the room just then, noticed him sitting thus in an abstracted mood. Feeling rather alarmed, he asked, "Maharaj, do you feel well?" It looked as if the question did not enter his ears fully, though it disturbed the current of his thought. He opened his lips and said, as if in continuation of the thought running through his mind at that time, "Listen, the spiritual atmosphere of this place is very elevating. The mind naturally runs after the infinite. I had no idea before that this place was so full of high spiritual inspiration. Now, as the days roll on, more of it is being revealed to me and making me mute with wonder. I now think of the infinite grace of the Master, that he should have brought me here for the very purpose of giving me the bliss of such divine realization. I had the same kind of feeling when I was in the Himalayas many years ago. The mind has a natural tendency towards meditation, and it soon becomes quiet and serene. It takes some effort to bring it down. Many saints and rishis must have undertaken deep spiritual practices here. They have left the place supercharged with great spiritual power. It is very conducive to spiritual practice. See," and others remarked the other day, that the forest here abound in fruits of various kinds. Maybe the rishis lived on those fruits and spent their days in spiritual practices. He kept silent for some time and then continued. "The other day when I sat thus looking quietly at the blue ranges, I noticed somebody coming out of this body and spreading over the whole world." With these words, he closed his lips. After a long time, he drew a long breath and said, "The Master is my Paramatman, the Supreme Self. It is he who pervades the whole universe. A quarter of his is this whole universe. His other 3 immortal quarters are in the bright region." Struck with wonder, the attendant kept silent for a moment and then said with folded hands, "Shall we never have any of these realizations, Maharaj? I cannot even slightly perceive what speciality there is in the spiritual atmosphere of this place." Mahapurushji, "Look here, my son. It is he alone who can bring about realization. Hold fast to him. He alone. Weep and pray to him. Out of his grace, he will grant you everything at the right moment. He is the master of our minds. He is the Supreme Self that has come down as our master. If he, out of his grace, but turns the mind even a little, then this very restless mind, mad as an elephant as it is, becomes calm and gets lost in samadhi. It gives up all attachment to worldly things once and for all. How can one reach such high spiritual states unless the mind becomes very fine? Again, can the mind rise to the supersensuous plane all of a sudden? It requires long spiritual practice. One can have the higher spiritual realizations only when the mind becomes finer than the finest and attains a high level of consciousness. The spiritual moods are manifest through a mind that is purified. As the mind reaches higher levels of consciousness, spiritual realities of greater order become reflected in it. What is essential is to have faith in and devotion to his lotus feet. When that is there, everything is achieved. As the news of Mahapurushji's stay in Odamakun spread, many devotees from all over Madras state gathered there to have his blessing and to be in his holy company. They all returned to their homes with their expectations fulfilled and with fresh inspiration for higher endeavor. Many devotees came from Malabar, Kerala, as well, and they were all initiated by Mahapurushji. One of them prayed for Mahapurushji's blessings on the eve of his departure and said, "I had not the good fortune of seeing the Master. You are my Master. You are my highest refuge." At this, Mahapurushji affectionately said, "You should not speak like that. He alone is the supreme refuge of all. He is the Lord. You must have read in the teachings of Sri Ramakrishna how he would say that the wave belongs to the sea and not the sea to the wave. I'm a mere slave of his, having taken refuge at his feet. In the Gita, Sri Krishna says that he is the goal, the supporter, the Lord, the witness, the abode, the refuge, the friend, the origin, the dissolution, the substratum, the storehouse, and the seed immutable of all. God is everything. He is the basis of everything. It is only by virtue of merit earned in many previous lives that you have come under the protective care of Sri Ramakrishna, the incarnation of this age. And an insignificant servant of his has dedicated you at his blessed feet. Your life is fulfilled, and it gets a fresh lease by this dedication at the feet of God. Shankaracharya has said 3 things, namely a human birth, a longing for liberation, and the blessings of a great soul are rare indeed, and can be had by the grace of God alone. They are indeed difficult to obtain and can be had by divine dispensation alone. By your good luck, you have got all the 3 treasures. Now get merged in the ocean of God's love, and you will become immortal. In the Vaishnava scriptures, those are the Vaishnavas are the worshippers of Krishna. They have a beautiful saying. One has the grace of all the 3, the Guru, Krishna, and the Vaishnavas, and yet, in the absence of the mercy of one alone, one's own self, one goes to rack and ruin. It's said in another way too, you need the grace of God, the grace of a guru, and the grace of your own mind. They're saying these in many different ways. One may have the grace of God, the mercy of a guru, and the benign help of a great devotee who has known Vishnu, yet everything comes to naught without the favor of one, that is, one's own sincere effort, and so the poor creature cannot get liberation. Now, with the help of what you have received, be absorbed in your spiritual practices, attain immortality, become immortal yourself. You will then be free forever from this endless cycle of birth and death. The devotee, kindly bless me that I may lose myself in my spiritual practices and never more be entangled in the net of this worldly life. Mahapurushji, I tell you all this only because you have my blessings. I bless you from the bottom of my heart that you may devote yourself heart and soul to the thought of our Master. Really speaking, my son, blessing is the only thing we have. How can I express the joy we feel when we come across somebody who wants to reach God, or even makes the slightest effort in that direction? Those who want to become free from the bondage of this world, and make a sincere effort towards that end, are very dear to us. The Master came to liberate bound souls from their bondage. We too are his servants, clinging forever to his feet. The only task in our life is to draw people towards God, to help them to proceed towards him. That is why the Master brought us with him and still keeps us here. Until our last breath, we shall be teaching that alone, telling people how they can attain God. This world is ephemeral. It lasts for a few days only. What a trouble it is to be here. And still, how strange it is that people become so engrossed in this momentary existence. They become so mad after the fleeting happiness of this world that they entirely forget the real aim of life. Such is the play of Maya that deludes the whole world. Mind you, my son, you are still a young man. Your mind has not yet been stamped with the worldliness as yet. I tell you the essence of it all. The one thing that we can feel in the innermost recesses of our heart. Nothing can be achieved without renunciation. That is why the Upanishads declares, it is through renunciation that some rare souls attain immortality. It is through renunciation alone that one can become immortal. Yoga and Boga, union with God and sense enjoyment, cannot go together. One cannot get any taste of the bliss of Brahman unless one gives up the happiness of the world. The Master drew a true picture of the world in a few simple words. The world consists of lust and gold, lucre. Anyway, it will not do to have mere external renunciation. One must eradicate from one's very mind any desire for lust and greed. Tulsidas also says, Rama cannot be where kama, lust, passion, is. One must give up the desire for all worldly enjoyment if one would realize God. We're at the end of a section, and so I'm wondering, are there any comments or questions? Or I think we've heard this many times. If not, I'll start this next section. It's also quite long. These are reminiscences of Swami Vivekananda. And the place is Bombay. The time is January 30th, 1927. The 65th birthday anniversary of Swami Vivekananda was observed in the local Sri Ramakrishna ashram with éclat. The main features of the celebration were worship, reading from scriptures, devotional music, and feeding of the devotees, and Daridra Narayanas, the poor. The joy of the occasion was increased 100-fold by the presence of Mahapurushji. After the evening services, the sannyasins and brahmacharins, the monks and the novices, gathered in his room and expressed their desire to hear from him about Swamiji. He related briefly about his first contact with Swamiji, how they had spent their days together at the Kasipur garden house in the service of the Master, about the establishment of the monastery at Bharanagore, and other such events. Then a monk asked him, Maharaj, were you and Swamiji together during the days of wandering? Mahapurushji, yes, sometimes I was with him, and sometimes we met by chance during those days. Once I set out with Brahmachari Haran of Varanasi to visit the places of pilgrimage in the western Himalayas. When we were at Hatras on our way to Vrindavan, we heard that Swamiji was there at the house of a railway officer. Swamiji was then suffering from fever, so we went to see him. He was greatly delighted at this unexpected meeting. I cannot give you any idea of the way he cut jokes with us, related many incidences merrily and full of humor, and expressed great joy at everything in spite of his high temperature. The fever left him after 3 days, but it made him very weak. He asked us to finish our pilgrimage to Vrindavan. It was planned that after this we would go with Swamiji to Rishikesh, for we expected that he would be all right by that time. Haran and myself went to Vrindavan, where we spent a few days happily. Is Vrindavan just an ordinary place of pilgrimage? It is the place where the Lord himself disported. The spiritual atmosphere of the place is unique. From Vrindavan, we went to Shamakund and Radhakund. Once, on the way, when Haran left his baggage in a place and went a little distance to ease himself, it was stolen. All the money that we both had was supposed to be in my possession, but Haran had kept a 10 rupee note separately in the bundle. The loss caused him great pain. He became very miserable. When we met Swamiji later, he was greatly amused at the incident and made a lot of fun about it. After visiting all the important places of Vrindavan, when we returned to Hatras, we found that Swamiji was again in bed with fever, and his temperature was very high. Through continuous suffering from fever, he had become extremely weak and emaciated. So we decided not to stay there any longer, but to take him down to Calcutta. He also agreed. Accordingly, letters were written to Calcutta and to the Bharanagore Monastery. And I think we're going to stop on that cliffhanger. We'll find out what happened. The people of Hatras did not want to see Swamiji go. Okay. Any comments about? I think Swami Shivananda states what he has to say extremely clearly. But if anyone has any questions or wants to discuss, feel free. Okay, I have a couple of announcements then. Saturday, the 12th, we'll have the gospel reading of Sri Ramakrishna, and I believe Swami Chidbrahmananda will be doing it for that Saturday. He will be giving the lecture on the 13th, and the topic is the ripening. We'll have the reading of For Seekers of God again next Wednesday. As long as there's no comments or things, then we'll end with a chant. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu. Good to see you all on Zoom. God. I hope everyone's keeping well. Good. Okay.
I didn't want to be ostentatious, but I'm just curious. The reference to he and to a Lord,